South America, a continent draped between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, is often misunderstood in the grand scheme of global geopolitics. A land where Portuguese and Spanish flags once fluttered proudly in the 16th century, it has, against all odds, emerged as a crucible of potential influence and intrigue. Hey Slavic Vikings, and welcome to Geopolitics of South America. The Spanish and Portuguese didn't just colonize, they sowed the seeds of cultural, linguistic and political identity that still mark the region's geopolitical landscape. While rivalries from colonial times have evolved, the shared history of these nations has forged a common identity that is unmistakably South American. Despite housing two of the top 10 most populous countries globally and representing about 1/8 of the world's landmass, South America often flies under the geopolitical radar. It exists in a unique limbo, caught between the world's poorest and richest regions. It is neither impoverished like Africa nor as wealthy as Europe or Oceania, creating a distinctive mediocre narrative that is all its own. This continent holds around a quarter of the world's freshwater and about 20% of its forests. With countries like Brazil emerging as global players, South America's geopolitical influence is steadily growing. Before the Great Depression in 1930, Argentina was a global economic power, with millions migrating to this country, but nowadays its economy is not looking so good, even compared to its South American neighbors, despite seemingly having all the right things at its disposal. In the early 20th century, Argentina was the 10th wealthiest nation per capita globally. It boasted an abundance of what most countries could only dream of. The country, stretching from the steamy tropics to the frigid Antarctic, possesses some of the world's most fertile land, accounting for nearly 54 million hectares of arable terrain, or roughly the size of Thailand. This also being the reason for its famous quality of beef production. Argentina's population of over 45 million people also works in its favor, ranking as the 32nd largest globally. This potent mix of ample resources, geographical advantages, and a significant labor force should ideally position Argentina as a formidable global player. Yet, today's reality paints a starkly different picture. Argentina's economic performance has been lackluster. The crux of Argentina's perplexing paradox, in my opinion, lies in its turbulent political history. The nation has experienced an unprecedented number of coups, over 6 in the 20th century alone. This constant instability has rattled investor confidence and resulted in inconsistent economic policies, contributing to the nation's economic underperformance. On a regional scale, while Argentina maintains close relations with Brazil through the Mercosur economic bloc, internal disagreements have tested this alliance's resilience. Despite these challenges, Argentina continues to play an active role globally. It's a member of the G20 and a founding member of multiple international organizations. However, its economic struggles often overshadow its diplomatic engagements. Argentina stands as a lesson that abundant resources and favorable geography are not enough. Political stability and effective governance are just as crucial for a nation's prosperity. For Argentina, breaking free from its political and economic walls may be its most crucial step yet. Near Argentina are the Falkland Islands, a remote archipelago in the South Atlantic. It has a complex history that can be tracked back to the 16th century, when it was first sighted by European explorers. However, it was not until the 18th century that the islands saw permanent settlements, as both British and Spanish empires had their eyes on this strategically located archipelago. In the early 19th century, Argentina, after gaining independence from Spain, laid claim to the Falklands. The British, however, swiftly asserted their control, leading to diplomatic tensions that would endure for over a century. The tension escalated to a boiling point in 1982, triggering the infamous Falklands War. The Falklands War started on April 2, 1982, when Argentina, under the military dictatorship of General Leopoldo Galtieri, invaded the Falklands. The Argentine leadership aimed to restore national pride amidst domestic crises and presumed that the British would not retaliate given the island's distance from the UK. However, the British, led by Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, responded with huge military and navy force, not wanting to see yet another place lost to the already declining British Empire. The conflict lasted 72 days, with the British forces successfully reclaiming the islands on June 14, 1982. The war resulted in a loss of around 900 lives and had profound geopolitical implications. For the UK, the victory boosted national morale and solidified Thatcher's political standing. In contrast, the defeat for Argentina intensified domestic discontent, accelerating the end of the military rule. Today, the Falklands War legacy still lingers. Argentina has not relinquished its claim over the islands, although diplomatic relations with the UK were restored in 1990. The sovereignty issue over the Falklands, known as Las Malvinas in Argentina, remains a sensitive subject. Argentina insists that the islanders do not have the right to self-determination, arguing that they are an implanted British population. However, a 2013 referendum in the Falklands saw 99.8% of voters choosing to remain a British overseas territory, further complicating the matter. Moving on to the biggest country in South America, both by size, population, and economy. Brazil, a country that sprawls across half of South America, is a continental heavyweight, both in terms of size and influence. Home to the largest portion of the Amazon rainforest, Brazil's stewardship of this global ecological treasure has raised global concerns and significantly influenced its international relations. Deforestation in the Amazon, driven by agriculture and illegal logging, has been a point of contention. The loss of this carbon sink not only aggravates global warming, but also triggers international censure. The Brazilian government's stance on environmental issues often leads to strained relations with countries concerned about climate change, especially with the EU, which has withheld trade deals because of the massive deforestation activities. On a geopolitical scale, Brazil's disputes are few and far between, thanks largely to the country's geographical advantage. It is encircled by neighbors of relatively equal or lesser power, thereby reducing territorial conflicts. However, this doesn't mean that it is without a share of diplomatic entanglements. One example is the ongoing Itaipu Dam dispute with Paraguay over energy pricing. As for Portugal, Brazil's relationship is deeply rooted in their shared history and language. This cultural connection has translated into solid diplomatic ties, with Brazil taking on a leadership role among Portuguese-speaking or Lusophone nations. In fact, Brazil played a key role in the creation of the Community of Portuguese Language Countries, or the CPLP, aimed at fostering mutual friendship and cooperation among Lusophone nations. Brazil's regional influence has risen in part due to Argentina's decline. As its traditional rival faltered, Brazil extended its sphere of influence over smaller nations such as Bolivia, Paraguay, and Uruguay. This influence is often exerted through the Mercosur, a regional trade bloc which, interestingly, Argentina and Brazil have proposed to launch a common currency for, in hopes of boosting economic stability within the bloc, as well as creating competition for the global reserve currency of the US dollar. When we delve into Brazil's energy reserves, the Tupi oil field is an undeniable focal point. Discovered in 2006, this offshore reserve has boosted Brazil's oil prospects. However, It's also sparked a geopolitical conundrum, as China, a major importer of Brazilian oil, is partnered with Brazil's oil extracting companies, which is a showcase of Brazil's recent move towards Chinese cooperation. Speaking of, Brazil is also an integral part of the BRICS alliance, which serves as a counterweight to traditional Western-dominated financial and political structures. While Brazil aligns itself with the BRICS countries, it astutely navigates a delicate balance between the US and China, ensuring it doesn't alienate either superpower. It also famously likes to play both sides for its own benefit. Situated in the heart of South America, Bolivia is a landlocked nation known for being the place where potatoes come from and vast lithium reserves. However, it wasn't always landlocked, which I will delve into in a bit. Despite its geographical disadvantage, Bolivia's wealth is in natural resources, particularly in gas and minerals. Bolivia is one of South America's largest natural gas producers. The country's extensive lithium reserves, a key component in rechargeable batteries, have gained increasing attention amid the global shift towards electric vehicles. This abundance of resources has made Bolivia an attractive partner for countries seeking to secure their energy and mineral needs. However, this resource richness also stirs up internal and external disputes. Within its borders, Bolivia has faced challenges in balancing economic gains from resource extraction with the environmental and social impacts on its indigenous communities. Externally, it's the country's historical territorial losses that have cast a long shadow over its geopolitical relations, particularly with Chile. In the War of the Pacific in the late 19th century, Bolivia lost its coastal region to Chile, which cut off its direct access to the Pacific Ocean. This loss has been a source of national grief and an enduring point of contention between Bolivia and Chile, to the point where Bolivia commemorates the Day of the Sea annually to mark its lost coastline and keep its maritime claims alive. Despite being landlocked, Bolivia maintains a navy, a symbolic manifestation of its hope to regain its lost coastal territory. The issue has gone as far as the International Court of Justice, where in 2018 the court ruled that Chile was not legally obliged to negotiate ocean access for Bolivia. Relations with Chile remain bad due to this unresolved dispute, while Bolivia generally maintains cordial relations with most other South American countries. Bolivia's relations with Brazil, its largest trading partner, are largely centered on natural gas trade. Bolivia's ties with Argentina, another key trading partner, have been further strengthened by shared political ideologies, particularly during the times when left-leaning governments were in power in both countries. With Peru, Bolivia shares not only a border, but also a historical bond through the ancient Inca Empire. This shared heritage has mostly fostered amicable relations, although minor border disputes have occasionally risen. Peru's politics are in a state of constant flux, with the country experiencing a constant rapid turnover of prime ministers. This political instability has been driven by a combination of factors, including corruption allegations, political infighting, and protests. The frequent changes in leadership often create uncertainty, hindering the country's long-term policy planning and impacting Peru's standing on the global stage. Territorially, Peru has had its share of disputes. A significant conflict was the maritime dispute with Chile, a legacy of the previously mentioned War in the Pacific in the late 19th century, where Peru, allied with Bolivia, lost territory to Chile. The dispute over the maritime boundary was eventually settled by the International Court of Justice in 2014, which largely upheld the status quo but granted Peru a small portion of the disputed area. Despite this, Peru maintains mostly positive relations with its neighbors. The country is part of the Andean Community, an economic bloc aimed at fostering regional relations and integration. Its ties with Bolivia, with whom it shares cultural heritage from the Inca Empire and history of alliances, including the War in the Pacific, are generally friendly, with the two even being united in a union for 3 years. One unique aspect of Peru's geopolitical relations is its significant Asian influence, particularly from Japan. In the late 19th and early 20th century, many Japanese immigrants arrived in Peru, forming one of the largest Japanese communities in Latin America. This has created a strong cultural connection, influencing Peruvian cuisine, cultural and economic relations. In fact, Alberto Fujimori, whose parents were Japanese immigrants, served as Peru's president in the 1990s and early 2000s, a testament to the significant Japanese influence in the country. Chile is affectionately known as the world's longest country due to its comical long and thin shape. Economically, Chile is often hailed as a success story in Latin America. The country's prudent economic policies, robust institutions, and rich natural resources, particularly copper, have driven steady growth and elevated living standards. However, despite these successes, social inequality remains a persistent challenge. In response to growing public demand for more equitable socio-economic policies, Chileans voted in 2020 to draft a new constitution. This historic decision, backed by 76% of voters, was a strong repudiation of the current constitution imposed during the authoritarian regime of Augusto Pinochet. The new constitution is expected to tackle long-term standing issues such as social inequality, the privatization of essential services, and indigenous rights. The ongoing constitutional process could define Chile's social contract and potentially influence other countries grappling with similar issues. However, Chile's political history is marked by volatility, with the nation experiencing more coups d'etats than any other country in the world, around 40 in total. This kind of disapproves my theory on why Argentina isn't successful, but this history of political instability coupled with a history of human rights abuses, particularly during Pinochet's regime, has left a complex legacy that continues to shape the country's politics and international relations. The nation has mostly positive relations with its neighbors, except for Bolivia and Peru, due to the earlier mentioned past conflicts. With Argentina, there has been some tension over the years, exacerbated by Chile's covert support for the UK during the Falklands War. Chile provided the UK with valuable intelligence straining its relationship with Argentina. Unlike Equatorial Guinea, Ecuador straddles the equator, hence its name. Ecuador had a long-standing dispute with Peru over a border disagreement. Despite a peace treaty signed in 1942, sporadic conflicts continued until 1998, when the Brasilia Presidential Act definitively marked the border, ending one of the longest-running international armed conflicts in the Western Hemisphere. Ecuador's relationship with Colombia has also experienced highs and lows, primarily due to issues related to the Colombian conflict. Relations were strained when Colombian forces carried out a raid against FARC rebels on Ecuadorian soil in 2008. Since then, the two countries have worked to restore diplomatic ties and cooperate on border security issues. Ecuador is a member of the Union of South American Nations and the Community of Latin American States and Caribbean States. However, its relationship with these blocs has fluctuated depending on its governmental political orientation. The country was the first in the world to recognize the rights of nature in its constitution. reflecting the rich biodiversity that characterizes its landscape, similarly to how Chile is now changing its constitution to also recognize the protection of nature. Interestingly, the US dollar is the official currency of Ecuador, a change implemented in 2000 after a severe economic crisis. South American countries aren't known for their management of fiscal policy, since they often have hyperinflation. So maybe the sacrifice of being dependent on the US for a stable currency is worth it. Moving on to Colombia. Historically, Colombia's territory was far more extensive. In the early 19th century, it was part of Gran Colombia, a vast nation that also included present-day Ecuador, Panama, and Venezuela. The disintegration of Gran Colombia in 1831 resulted in these territories becoming separate countries. The legacy of these historical ties, however, still lingers in Colombia's relations with its neighbors, particularly with Venezuela and Ecuador. For instance, despite occasional tensions, these countries share economic ties and a degree of cultural exchange rooted in their shared history. Speaking of territorial changes, one of the most significant in Colombia's history is the loss of Panama. In the early 20th century, the US, eager to build a canal through the Panama to connect the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, supported Panama's secession from Colombia, since Colombia did not allow the building of the canal. The creation of Panama and the subsequent construction of the Panama Canal significantly altered trade routes and global shipping, a development that still has considerable geopolitical implications today. This intervention strained Colombia's relations with the US, with some bitterness still persisting to this day. As for Colombia's internal challenges, it has been grappling with a long-standing armed conflict involving government forces, paramilitary groups, and guerrilla organizations like FARC. The peace agreement in 2016 marked a significant step towards ending this conflict. However, its implementation has been full of challenges, further complicated by issues like drug trafficking and social inequality. Even though many consider them culturally close, it shares a volatile relationship with Venezuela, with ongoing disputes over border controls and political ideologies. Meanwhile, its relationship with Ecuador has been tested by spillover from Colombia's internal conflict, but has generally improved over time. The paradox of Venezuela is both intriguing and heartbreaking. Despite boasting the largest proven oil reserves in the world, surpassing even Saudi Arabia, it finds itself mirrored in a profound socio-economic and political crisis. This paradox is often referred to as the resource curse, where countries abundant in natural resources like Venezuela tend to have less economic growth and worse development outcomes than countries with fewer natural resources, like Switzerland or Ireland. It goes without saying that the economy of Venezuela is heavily reliant on oil exports, making it vulnerable to fluctuations in oil prices. The plunge in global oil prices since 2014 have severely hit Venezuela's economy, exacerbating the pre-existing economic mismanagement and corruption issues. Years of expropriation, inadequate investment, and neglect have left the country's oil industry in a state of severe disrepair. What further complicates the situation is Venezuela's political landscape. Under the leadership of Hugo Chavez and later Nicolas Maduro, Venezuela marked on a path towards socialism. However, policies like nationalization of industries, price controls, and currency controls have led to an economic decline, exacerbated by increasing corruption and inefficiency. Today, Venezuela stands as one of the last remaining socialist states, alongside countries like Cuba and North Korea. Venezuela's political alignment has also shaped its international relations. The country has sought alliances with other nations opposing the US, like Russia, China, Iran, and Cuba, offering them lucrative oil deals in exchange for diplomatic support and aid. However, these alliances have often attracted criticism and sanctions, particularly from the United States and other Western nations. US sanctions on Venezuela, justified on grounds of human rights abuses and corruption, have further isolated Venezuela's economy, adding even more to its existing economic problems. Guyana, though geographically located on the South American continent, is a fascinating mix of South American and Caribbean influences. This largely English-speaking nation is part of the Caribbean community, indicating its close cultural, economic, and political ties with the Caribbean region. I'll go deeper into why this is in a sec. The Essequibo territory, making up about 2/3 of Guyana's total area, is a bone of contention between Guyana and Venezuela. Venezuela's claim to the region dates back to the 19th century, when Guyana was still a British colony. The dispute was seemingly resolved in 1899, with an international arbitration ruling in favor of Britain. However, Venezuela revived its claim in the 1960s, alleging that the 1899 ruling was invalid. Guyana has implemented an interesting tactic to prevent this invasion. It purposely has underdeveloped this dense jungle region so that even with a far more superior army of Venezuela, it would be nearly impossible to traverse the terrain and have a successful invasion. Despite these ongoing territorial disputes, Guyana has continued to develop its resources. The country is also anticipating an economic boom due to recent major offshore oil discoveries. But these developments have only stoked tensions with Venezuela, which views them as an infringement on its territorial claims. Geographically, Guyana is a realm of vast untouched wilderness thanks to its sparse population, with a population density of less than 4 people per square kilometer. It is one of the least densely populated countries in the world. Despite being the only English-speaking country in South America, Guyana's culture and history align it more with the Caribbean. It shares with the Caribbean a history of British colonial rule, plantation economy, and African slavery, and also Indian indentured labor. Guyana's cricket team, for instance, doesn't play in the South American tournaments, but competes in the West Indies cricket team, another testament to its cultural alignment with the Caribbean. Similarly to Guyana, Suriname's culture and history align it more with the Caribbean than the South American continent. One significant territorial dispute involving Suriname has been with its neighbor Guyana, over the region called the Tigre area, or the New River Triangle. This has been an area of contention since the 19th century, and despite several attempts to negotiate a resolution, the dispute remains unresolved. The 15,000 kilometer area is currently controlled and administered by Guyana. The maritime border with Guyana was also disputed, with both countries laying claim to a rich in oil area. This dispute was taken to the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea, which ruled in 2007 that the area should be split, though Guyana retained control of the majority of it. There has also been minor disputes with French Guiana, primarily over the Maroni River, which forms the border between the two countries. Suriname's ethnic diversity has largely resulted from its history as a Dutch colony, with a significant proportion of its population tracing their roots back to India and Indonesia, brought to Suriname as indentured laborers. The capital, Paramaribo, is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, notable for its distinct colonial architecture that combines Dutch and local influences. French Guiana, unlike its neighbors, is not an independent country, but an overseas department and region of France. This means that it is in fact a part of the European Union, and its currency is the euro. Its administrative system and institutions are directly governed by France and follow French law. Therefore, French Guiana has the largest national park in the EU, covering around 41% of French Guiana's territory. French Guiana is best known globally for the Guyana Space Center located near Peru, which is used by the European Space Agency, the French Space Agency, and Arianespace. It was chosen as a space launch site due to its proximity to the equator, which allows the Earth's rotation to provide an additional launch boost. Despite being part of France, French Guiana faces several challenges that are quite distinct from those on the mainland. These include a high cost of living, low employment rates, and inadequate public services, which have led to social unrest at times. Moving on to the last two gay countries, Paraguay and Uruguay, also referred to as Paraguay. It is the second landlocked country we've covered. Despite its geographical position, which could be seen as a disadvantage, the country is leveraging its potential as a transit hub through ambitious infrastructure projects such as the Bi-Oceanic Corridor. The Bi-Oceanic Corridor is a significant multinational infrastructure project aiming at connecting the Atlantic to the Pacific Ocean via a railroad passing through Brazil, Paraguay, Argentina, and Chile. Paraguay in particular sees this as an opportunity to boost its economy, improve its regional integration, and increase its significance on the geopolitical arena. This corridor is not just a transportation project, but a strategic maneuver. It is envisioned to compete with the famous Panama Canal, potentially providing a faster and cheaper route for goods traveling between the oceans, especially those originating from or destined to countries along the corridor. This project represents a significant geopolitical shift for the involved countries. By enhancing connectivity, they could reduce their dependency on traditional shipping routes, increase their negotiation power on transportation costs, and attract new investments, particularly from Asia, where demand for Latin American commodities like soy and iron are high. As far as disputes are concerned, Paraguay has been relatively peaceful throughout its history. The country did experience significant territorial changes in the 19th century following the Paraguayan War, also known as the War of the Triple Alliance, against Brazil, Argentina, and Uruguay. However, current borders are well established and recognized by its neighbors, unlike many countries we've covered in South America. It shares the world's second largest hydroelectric dam, Itaipu, with Brazil. While this joint venture provides a significant portion of Paraguay's electricity, pricing and distribution disagreements have caused occasional diplomatic strains. Paraguay also has a strong economic tie with Argentina, with the two countries sharing the Paraná River, a crucial waterway for the landlocked country's exports. Uruguay, or Uruguay, is somewhat of an underdog when it comes to regional politics. It's sandwiched between two regional powerhouses, Argentina and Brazil, but manages to hold its own with a robust economy and reputation for stability and rule of law. One of the intriguing projects that Uruguay has been part of is the Hidrovia Paraná-Paraguay, a waterway that extends from Puerto Cáceres in Brazil to Nueva Palmira in Uruguay, flowing through Paraguay and Argentina along its course. It plays a vital role in regional trade by providing an inexpensive and efficient means of transportation, connecting landlocked regions of Paraguay and Bolivia with the Atlantic Ocean, which also bolstered strong relations with these countries. Despite its relatively peaceful existence, Uruguay has had minor border disputes with Brazil in the past, mainly over the islands on the Guaraim River. However, these have been largely resolved through negotiations and mutual agreements. It shares a significant part of its border with Argentina, and while the border is well defined, the two countries have had disagreements over the shared water resources, particularly the Rio de la Plata and its tributaries. The pulp mill dispute in 2006 was a plan where Uruguay was to build pulp mills on the Uruguay River. But this sparked environmental concerns in Argentina. The disagreement was eventually taken to the International Court of Justice, which ruled in Uruguay's favor. Culturally, Uruguay aligns closely with its neighbors, sharing the Rio Platense Spanish dialect, love for soccer, and yerba mate with Argentina. On a fun note, Uruguay holds the record for the world's longest national anthem in terms of duration. It lasts about 6 minutes. I'll play the entire thing now. Nah, just kidding. Also, it was the first economy in the world to fully legalize the production and sale of marijuana, making it a pioneer in drug policy, and unsurprisingly, it has legalized same-sex marriage. South Georgia and the South Sandwich Islands, I promise you I'm not making these names up, are a remote collection of islands in the southern Atlantic Ocean. Interestingly, they're a British overseas territory and are administered from the Falkland Islands. Yeah, the same islands that Argentina and Britain fought over. The South Sandwich Islands are volcanic specks in the middle of nowhere and are uninhabited, unless you count the penguins and seals. So there isn't much to talk about these tasty islands. South Georgia, on the other hand, is a different story. Well, kind of. It used to be a whaling station, but today it's mainly inhabited by scientists and a lot of those same penguins. No significant geopolitical disputes happening around these parts, mostly because it's miles away from anywhere and, you know, the penguins. However, the islands were involved in the Falklands War when Argentina briefly occupied South Georgia before being kicked out by the British. That was all of South America. And if you enjoyed the video, make sure to like and subscribe. And as always, farewell, żegnam, and goodbye.